Hello, everybody. My name is Jefferson Wang. I'm Accenture's global 5G lead and really excited today to talk to you about private networks. So thanks for joining us. Just to give you a quick executive summary of how we look at private networks, again, there's five really big macro trends that are happening that are causing this need for this modern network strategy. Number one, just the sheer number of devices that are coming out. If you just look at the number of people who are unconnected, over 3 billion people on the planet today are still not connected. More IoT devices, more sensors. We're starting to see more and more of these devices. And that leads to macro trend number two, which is just this huge amount of data that's being generated by these devices. So ultimately, how is that data getting processed? How is it getting stored? How is decisions getting made off of that? And that brings you to macro trend number three, which is kind of that cloud and edge continuum, that shift from central compute down to closer to where the data is being processed to reduce the latency, the physical distance traveled. And then you look at big trend number four, where there's this convergence of experiences where if it's fixed or mobile, it doesn't really matter. The users are really expecting kind of this seamless usage, this seamless functionality. And ultimately, number five, the big trend we see is that need to accelerate digital transformation. And those really five big macro trends are causing this requirement for this modern network strategy. Now, within those modern network strategies, private cellular becomes a really important piece to this. So again, this private cellular, this private network ability to provide a tailored solution, really we find the necessary part of it is really delivering those mission critical use cases, the things where latency really matters, reliability really matters to the enterprises and clients. If you think about manufacturing with worker safety, or you think about oil and gas with predictive maintenance, or smart districts or logistics with autonomous vehicles, what are those mission critical use cases that could benefit from a private network? And then if you look at really what are the different benefits of this, it's really a single network that can connect multiple users, multiple devices, all of these IoT endpoints, so that the actual customer, the client, the enterprise doesn't need to have a massive department that can deal with the Wi-Fi, deal with the fixed network, deal with the wireless network, and deal with the private network, right? What is just a more singular way to actually connect? Then when you look at 5G and private networks as an enabling technology, you start to see multi-axis edge compute come online. You start to see more AI and ML, more automation enabled by this. And that's where you start to get really these building blocks to deliver this innovation on top of it on this cloud native stack. And that's where you get really exciting use cases come to fruition. But really, the final takeaway is pulling together this end-to-end private network does require an ecosystem. It requires partnerships across communication service providers that may have spectrum in certain parts of the world, network equipment providers, cloud providers, device manufacturers, system integrators, ecosystem players to enable this full solution. So there's a lot of orchestration involved. Now, when we think about the complexities that the enterprise faces today, it's a non-exhaustive list, but it's an incredible amount of complexity, right? Based on starting with even the industry that they're in, when you look at what their actual needs are. Number two, how are you deploying these things? Is it a wide area network that's above and below ground? Is it multi-sites that are global? Is it more of a harsh industrial environment that requires specific devices that are class two type 2 type devices? That site really makes a big difference. And then ultimately those technology decisions on what type of use cases do you want to open up? How do you want to think about your actual migration of technology, your devices? What type of cloud environment do you want to have? Is it hybrid or is it something else? And then ultimately thinking about the business impacts at the very bottom. Is this something that's going to increase cost and the actual break-even point is too far out? Or how do you think about the total cost of ownership? Or what is the right business case to actually get the board of directors to approve an investment envelope? So many different decisions that are faced with an enterprise to think through these actual private networks. Now, when you look at kind of our work in private networks, it really comes down to really 6 key success factors that we really summarize this to. One is certainly simplicity. How can you get easy access to these private networks? Number two is the flexibility on how to be able to work with the different solution providers, the partners, the network equipment providers, the operators, the devices, to be able to actually get to that business outcome in a secure manner, the control that you actually want or may not want in certain instances. And again, thinking through how much or how little of that private network continuum you want to bring on site. If it is just the radio and the edge compute, or if you even want to go as far as bringing a core on site, how much of that control versus cost do you want to actually put into play? And then overall, what's the benefit of having a private network so that you're not moving tons and tons of data over the networks, which actually costs money now, obviously, when you're moving it back and forth over mobile networks or moving it over fixed line networks and getting it to cloud, you're paying for storage, you're paying for transport of data, you're paying for all that. How do we think about the right pieces of data to move back and forth in order to get a result? And then cloud at scale, how do we think about more of this automated applications, more of these new capabilities that are unlocked by AI and ML? And then ultimately, how do you support all of this? How do you make sure there's a seamless way to actually support all the applications, the network itself, and the actual outcomes? So ultimately, what is a private cellular network, right? And we just want to just kind of clarify it on the left. When you look at what a private cellular network is, it's dedicated resources managed locally on the actual infrastructure and the connectivity. And then it really provides more local coverage and capacity. It is incredibly important to think through the difference between that and a public cellular network. For example, if you think about, you may not get coverage where you need it based on the public cellular. You are absolutely working with consumers and enterprises on that public cellular network. It's managed by someone else. It's managed by a network operator. So you have to think through kind of these key differences. But the other thing that we talked about previously is with a private cellular network, you actually have many different permutations. And there's a big difference on how much control you want versus cost. And that's really the key levers to think through is if you want full control and bringing on even a standalone core plus the radio plus the edge all on-prem, you may have the most secure network, you may have the most reliable network, and you may have the best performance on the latency, but how much more is your cost increasing? And what's that benefit and trade-off that you're looking at? So really, one of the big questions we get when working with clients on this space is, do we really need a private network, or can something like Wi-Fi fit the bill? And when you think about the key differences, and if you actually look at Wi-Fi being a low-cost option that's on unlicensed spectrum, but is really best effort, there's really some key advantages to Wi-Fi. Number one, huge device ecosystem with really good standards bodies in place. So a lot of access to developers, a lot of access to devices, a lot of access to solutions. Lower cost to move and transport data around when we think through that. And if you look at really the disadvantage of Wi-Fi, though, is really, there isn't real mobility there. There is not real resiliency or reliability in Wi-Fi. But then you flip to the other side, you look at cellular, and you look at private networks on cellular. Taking aside the 5G, 4G debate, but just saying private networks, you've got true mobility, you've got definitely low latency, and you've got this ability to handle a set number of devices that's greater without interference. If you just look at Wi-Fi as you move from 2.5 to 5 gigahertz and there's more channels available, there's still this issue with interference, whereas on the cellular side, you have less of that. It's more managed spectrum as you go through that. Now, if you kind of look at the split between what is needed on cellular, 5G certainly faster speeds, but deployment areas could be different dependent upon what part of the spectrum you're using with high band. 4G is much better for kind of a macro deployment, or let's call it larger logistics use cases. Number of devices connected, 5G has many more devices connected per square kilometer, and also latency. So when you get to a standalone core on 5G versus 4G, you just get a lower latency from that perspective. So, decisions to be made, and I think it's really important to remember that it's not going to be killing off one or the other. They're actually going to have different uses, and they sit in tandem together. So you could think about it as the IT use cases really do well on Wi-Fi, and the operational, the more mission critical, does better on private networks. So why are enterprises really interested all of a sudden in private networks? Many industries have actually been using private networks for a long time. So the utilities industry has been deploying out private networks for their field area networks for a long time prior to these kind of recent days. But security is a big one. To have your data really sit inside your organizations, inside your control, is a big reason why. When you think about data costs, again, we talked about that, not transporting it out across fixed or wireless really reduces those cost opportunities. Performance, where you can actually guarantee a service level where a public network or other technologies can't guarantee a service level. Coverage, you may be in a remote location where you actually can't get adequate coverage. So how do you solve that with a more surgical deployment? And then ultimately, a public cellular network is more about best effort in terms of handling your traffic and your needs. So as you think about private cellular as this new connectivity fabric, one, it's dedicated, two, it's optimized, three, it's highly secure. That leads to really these mission critical use cases. And what we wanted to do is really show you some real world examples, real world case studies of clients that we've worked with that might give you an idea around what are the types of use cases, what are the types of devices, what are the types of business problems you can solve with a private network. So if you look at this just basic components of this, certainly it's the right enterprise setting that needs these mission critical technologies. Two, how much of the connectivity infrastructure do you want in that private environment? Is it just the radio? Is it edge? Is it a core? Is it a standalone core? When you look at the access to the actual network operator and also how it gets to the public or private cloud are all kind of those key components to really think through. So really, when you distill that down to this is one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world that we worked with, and their big problem here was worker safety. And they spend millions of dollars on insurance, on keeping their workers safe, and different claims and workers' compensation. That they said to us, is there a way, Accenture, you can help us think through solving this? And you don't have to actually be bound by any technologies. So we said, hey, let us try a private network. We believe this could be an interesting use case. So the first thing we did was we really said, what are the different problems? One is heavy machinery, spinning very quickly, and lots of really serious health issues or dismemberment that's happening. So could we do this through video analytics? And can we solve this through a video camera sending data to a private network and then an edge compute server that determines certain things? So for example, is the actual worker wearing their correct protective gear? Do they have their hard hat on? Do they have their eye protection on? Are they really ready to go? If not, then certainly do not start the machine. Do not start the dangerous machinery. Number two, on the second use case, it was if you did have your eye protection on, if you did have your hard hat on, and you actually start the machinery up, what if you actually are moving around too quickly and a piece of loose article of clothing, maybe a glove, is getting too close to the spinning item or the spinning drill press in this example? And you'll get a loud proximity warning that says, hey, you're getting too close. This is a dangerous behavior. Please be careful every time you turn around. The third use case is, let's say you accidentally touch or come in contact with the high-speed drill press. How does it instantly shut off the power and your fingers are safe, your hands are safe? And again, these are real problems that we're working on solving. So we deployed this private network with an edge compute server on-prem. Accenture built out the actual video analytics solution on top of it, and it's actually running on the shop floor today. And what was nice is that we all of a sudden found these new use cases that could use the same technology stack actually in the same manufacturing plant. So for example, there's another big problem where a lot of expensive equipment is getting actually damaged because heavy boxes are put on top of light boxes. Now, we don't really think about this in the day-to-day, but in a busy manufacturing plant, all these boxes look the same. You have no idea what's in what, but you're just stacking them. And as a result, when the heavy boxes get stacked on top of the light ones, you're getting these damaged goods underneath it. So we use the same video analytics solution, the same private network, the same edge stack to be able to solve that problem as well. So you're starting to see kind of these clustering of these use cases to solve these problems. So when you look at different case studies that Accenture has worked on with clients, we wanted to highlight three. The first one is really with a large oil company. And what we worked on was there's a lot of problems with they had legacy connectivity. It was very fragmented. There was licensed spectrum, there was unlicensed spectrum, there was proprietary devices, there was smartphones, there was tablets, there was a whole, as my colleague calls it, a cocktail of connectivity that was out there. And they wanted to really simplify this. But we had to go through number one, what's the overall strategy of this modern network? What is the overall connectivity strategy that we're looking at? And actually, after building out a clear picture of what that strategy needs to be, the next thing we did was try and figure out what are all the use cases that we can actually benefit and solve business problems from based on that strategy. What are the new technologies that are unlocked when it comes to more edge compute, more AI and ML, more devices, more IoT, all of those analytics pieces, how do we think through them affecting use cases for the employees and the actual people in the refinery? And then the next thing we had to do after the use cases was really break those down into what are the key technology components that are required. How much of a private network control do you need? What type of an edge compute server? And what are the requirements for that? How do you think through different devices? And when are those devices being launched so that you can actually unlock these use cases? And then we actually got this picture of this technology. And then we had to actually figure out who are the ecosystem players that are able to actually provide these solutions. And we had this ecosystem scan and this ecosystem map that we created. And when are they going to be available to kind of join into the journey? And then in the end, what brought it all together was really this patent pending business case, this investment model we created. And we had to sit down to understand all the network cost components on equipment and device. We had to understand all the value levers from the use cases we talked about and figure out when is the break even point and when is the actual time when we start to see revenue and benefit from it. And this tool that we built out was able to be used to be sent up to the C-suite and ultimately the board of directors to unlock an investment envelope for this transformation. So a really good example of kind of end to end, what did it take to actually drive out a private network solution? Number two, on Phillips 66, this is a public credential where AT&T as the network operator, Phillips 66 as the client, and ultimately Accenture as the system integrator was able to come together to really work on this digital transformation in these oil refineries. And we actually managed to deploy a private network on-prem. It was 4G upgradable to 5G. There was a MEC, or a multi-access edge compute solution on-prem, and it was working through local traffic breakout, and it was working through these use cases. But again, a really interesting example of how to solve business problems with a private network. And then that last example we just talked about in detail, which was the large office furniture manufacturer, where they actually had to figure out how to solve worker safety as an issue, but then we actually figured out all of these new use cases on top of the same tech stack, which actually brought the business case forward and earlier to realize. So as you can see, we're super excited about the direction of 5G, private networks, and edge together. We'd love to talk to you more, so hopefully we'll get a chance to do that during the conference.